As a kid, I was always fascinated with history. I read about it, I watched documentaries, but now I want to visit and walk the ground of those historic places that I've spent years studying. Join me on my trek, History Adventures. We are in the Solomon Islands for this series, and the video today will be focusing on PT 109 and President, then Navy Lieutenant Kennedy and his crew. A little history on PT 109. She was built by Elco in Bayonne, New Jersey in 1942. She was transported from the Norfolk Navy Yard in August 1942 on board the Liberty ship SS Joseph Stanton to the Solomon Islands and arrived at Tulagi. Since arriving, PT-109 was engaged in heavy combat around Guadalcanal. Kennedy arrived in April 1943 and took command of PT-109 operating out of Tulagi. Kennedy lived on the island of Tulagi, and the PT base was just across the harbor. PT-109 had a crew of 13. In June of 1943, PT-109 began operations from the newly captured Rendova base. They patrolled the Ferguson Passage and Blackett Straits looking for Japanese warships of the Tokyo Express. On August 1, 1943, 15 PT boats headed out from Rendova to intercept Japanese destroyers resupplying Japanese troops on the island of Kolombangara. PT-109 was in B Division that included PT-162, 159, and 157, and they were stationed the farthest from Rendova. PT-109 did not have radar. PT-159 did have radar and spotted the Japanese destroyers. PT-159 and 57 gave chase and fired their torpedoes. Both of them failed to radio PT-109 that they were leaving the area and headed toward Gizo. At 2 a.m. on August 2nd, PT-109, PT-162, and PT-169 remained in the area. It was cloudy, moonless, and a light fog was starting to roll in. Visibility was very low. Kennedy had 109's engines idling so not to stir up the water, causing the phosphorescent wake that developed. The Japanese destroyer Amagiri had completed offloading supplies and troops and needed to get back to Rabaul before U.S. air patrols started at dawn. She was traveling up the Blackett Straits at almost 40 knots with no lights visible. PT-109 spotted the Amagiri and had roughly 10 seconds to respond. At 2:27 a.m. on August 2nd, 1943, PT-109 was struck and cut in two by the Japanese destroyer. The explosion and fireball from the fuel on board caused the sea to be filled with flames. Kirksey and Marnie were killed instantly during the collision. PT-169 and PT-162 saw the explosion in the distance but didn't think anyone could survive and did not return to search. The explosion was also witnessed by an Australian coast watcher, Reg Evans, who was high on the hills of Kolombangara. The bow of PT-109 was still floating, so the 11 survivors clung to it. They drifted for almost 11 hours when they noticed the bow was taking on water and risked sinking. Kennedy knew they couldn't swim to Kolombangara or to Gizo due to the Japanese forces on each of those islands. Kennedy saw a small abandoned island in the distance, Plum Pudding Island. The crew made for it. McMahon was severely burned and unable to swim. Kennedy swam with the straps of McMahon's life jackets in his teeth, pulling him towards the island. The exhausted crew dragged themselves on the shores of Plum Pudding Island and immediately moved inland to hide from passing Japanese ships and barges. Plum Pudding Island is about 100 yards in diameter and had no food or water. Today the island is maintained by a caretaker that stays on the island. The caretaker maintains artifacts and monuments dedicated to PT-109 and her crew. Plum Pudding Island has been renamed Kennedy Island, and the Solomon Islanders are incredibly proud of their part in history. With no water or food and the hot South Pacific sun beating down on the survivors, the decision was made to swim to the next island in search of water. On August 4, 1943, the crew of PT-109 made their way towards Olasana Island. Again, Kennedy swam with the straps of McMahon's life jacket in his teeth, pulling him. Today, locals and visitors make the trek to Olasana Island for picnics and the incredible swimming and snorkeling. There is no development on the island, so it remains very much like the time Kennedy and the PT-109 crew were on it. On August 5th, Kennedy and Ross made the swim to Nauru Island. It was closer to Ferguson Passage, and Kennedy was thinking it would be easier to spot a passing PT boat. While on the island, Kennedy found abandoned Japanese supplies of crackers, candy, and water, which he was able to get to his crew on Olasana. It was while on Nauru that Kennedy made contact with the Coast Watchers Gasa and Kamana. Kennedy would carve into a coconut the following message: Gasa and Kamana also went to Olasana and made contact with the crew there. Ensign Leonard Tom penciled a note: Australian Coast Watcher Reg Evans would get the information of the survivors and send food and supplies to Olasana. Kennedy was told to move to Gomu Island and wait for rescue while his crew waited on Olasana. Gasa, Kamana, and Carey would paddle 15 hours to the base at Rendova to deliver the coconut and paper messages. Reg Evans was able to transmit a radio message confirming the 11 survivors of PT-109. On August 8, 1943, the survivors of PT-109 were finally rescued. Walking on Plum Pudding, Olasana, and Nauru Island was like walking into history. To think of what the crew of PT-109 endured, shark-infested waters, Japanese troops, the heat and bugs, just makes this history more incredible. Hope you'd enjoyed this episode of History Adventures. Please like and comment to the video, and if you could, please subscribe to our page and share with everyone you know that's a history buff. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next episode.